I have found embarrassing, I've been humiliated by, or I feel ashamed of. That's where the peace and justice has actually come from. The peace in terms of finally not being on the run, not being in hiding, and the justice because if I peel back enough layers, I always find that I am innocent. And the same thing I find with everyone. If I peel back enough layers of personality and conditioning, what I realize about every one of us is that we are innocent. And so that's why it's justified that we can find peace. There's not one being who is not worthy of being at peace. None of us have done anything. It doesn't matter what we've done. Nothing that we've ever done is enough to say that we are not worthy of being at peace or finding a place, a way of loving ourselves, truly accepting ourselves as we are.
Great. So how has that awareness brought you into the work that you're doing now? By the way, for those of you that joined late, today we're conversing with Freedom Cartwright. She's a registered yoga teacher, Course in Miracles minister, and family constellation systems counselor, and the founder of Freedom Rail Tours. Today we're talking about healing racism and Freedom's path through these disciplines to create Freedom Rail Tours, what she's doing with it, and how she's tackling racism um, and the refinding of peace for humanity. So if you want to go ahead and continue, Freedom.
So wait, Rachel, what was, you asked me a question and then I I went.
Yeah, so you've I want to know kind of how you got to where you are now. Like, this Freedom Tours, we've talked about it a bit, and it's monumental in my mind. It's incredible what you're doing. So I think everyone would like to know kind of, it's great that they're visiting those places, but what you're doing when you visit those places, how you're unraveling suffering in the world, how you're helping through the work that you're doing, helping humanity refine their peace, and your personal path to getting there. Like, you started off not doing these things. You started something in your life led you to wanting to focus on healing racism. So what was your personal process? Like, what happened where it was like light bulb, like, I'm going to do this. I can do this. Everyone can do this.
Yeah.
Right? What was that aha moment?
My aha moment. I think my aha moment is connected to me changing my name to Freedom. I wasn't born with the name Freedom, but maybe I was. Anyway, previous to being called Freedom, my name was Kimberly. And Kimberly was a lovely person who wanted to do good and wanted to look good and wanted people to like her very much. And that premise of wanting people to like me, of doing whatever it took to get people to like me, was just a suffering. There was a lot of suffering in that. I mean, there is no way that I can control what anyone else is thinking or feeling.
Right.
So that was the path that led me deeply to investigate suffering and the release of suffering, because I suffered so much. Now, as a, mature adult, I can understand when I look at myself in previous years, that I was a product of my conditioning. Like, I was a Black girl who was born in the early 60s, who grew up in a country that looked at Black people as less than, let's put it that way, as less than. And I felt that, it didn't have to be painted on a billboard. I felt it. I was a sensitive individual. I felt it. And I think I spent my whole life trying to bridge that gap, trying to figure out, how can I get you to think that I'm not less than? How can I get you to see who I really am? What was missing was that I was not seeing who I really am. And that, I think we all get the suffering we need to get us out of the suffering. I received the suffering I needed to begin to like shed the stuff like an old coat, like taking off clothes, like just saying, "Oh, I don't need that idea anymore. That idea is not helping me. Oh, I don't need that thought anymore. That thought's not helping me." And as I began to dismantle these ideas, first look at these ideas. These ideas were causing so much suffering in me. The idea of most recently, as we start having conversations in our country around race, the idea that I have to wait until everyone in our country understands the racial issues before I can be happy. That's another form of suffering that I think is somewhat of a new nuance. Like, well, we have to wait till everybody figures this out and then we can solve things. And I'm just like, the time of waiting for somebody else to figure something out in order for me to be at peace is over. My peace is it's in my control. So my journey through all the things I did, what brought me to A Course in Miracles was the promise that A Course in Miracles made, that the premise of the Course in Miracles was peace.
Right.
This document is about peace. That's what brought me to A Course in Miracles. What brought me to family constellations was understanding all the stuff that came before, like my lineage, my ancestors, enslavement, Jim Crow, all the stuff that my ancestors experienced. I needed to understand how to find equanimity, how to feel in some way other than a victim, resentful and angry about what had happened in order for my family to just survive. It wasn't pleasant if every time I looked at the experiences that my family had, both present and in the past, I just got very angry and critical and judgmental. That was not peaceful. So family constellations is about understanding how the past is living in the present through you, through me. And so I used family constellations to, again, begin to dismantle these old ideas that I had been carrying around, like the 100-pound weight, and starting to say, oh, it's safe for me to let go of these defensive ideas. It's safe. And the minute I started, letting things go, it didn't happen all at once by any means. It's still happening. I still notice ways that I can constrict or I can create separation based on, oh, that person, I love this one. That person isn't as evolved as me, right? That whole thing.
Right.
Or that person makes me feel unsafe, blah, blah, blah. Like I still notice lots of ways in which I create separation. And all these tools that I've been working with for decades help me to keep up with this conveyor belt. As some new form of suffering comes down the conveyor belt and presents itself, I can look at it and say, oh, perhaps the best thing for me to do is to take this to my yoga mat and to kind of metabolize it, breathe it, digest it, allow it to come in and out, and then let it go. Or perhaps the best thing I could do with this form of suffering is to, do Byron Katie's The Work with it, the 4 questions and the turnaround. Is this really true? I mean, I've used so many things to become free, to become freedom. I've used so many things and I will continue to.
So different different tools are important. So this is a great highlighting of how personal peace, it's not a static thing. It's, we fall off the horse 1,000 times a day, and it's how to get back on, how to rebalance again. So I want to know, you had talked a little bit about your first journey down south last year, kind of how expansive that was for you. What happened going down there, looking at racism, looking at your family's past, your lineage, and what was actually going on with the energy down there. And I think a lot of people are very curious about the south of the states, the past, the energy imprint there, and how to get out of it, how to unwind that history. And so, could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe what your personal experience was that led you to want to take others down there.
So the same voice that kept telling me that your name is freedom,
Hmm.
and the same voice, it's just intelligence itself. It's not, I'm not saying I'm intelligent. I'm saying there is
But you
intelligence,
are. Yes.
and that's available as I clear the clutter. I'm more and more available to intelligence. So intelligence said, your name is freedom. I thought that was very hippy dippy. I was like, you got the wrong girl. But anyway, it was very persistent. That same intelligence orchestrated just a long period of time in which I sat with Dr. Martin Luther King's energy. In the room that I'm in right now, you can see behind me, I have like an altar
Hmm.
that I've created. And that altar I created a couple of years ago. I sat in this room for like about 4 months. I'd come in here and I would just cry. I'd cry for hours.
Hmm.
Um, I would I would go into that picture right there is from a Time magazine, and that's Dr. King at the Lincoln Memorial, speaking to a large crowd. And I would actually be invited into that experience, and I would just find my energy healing the people in the crowd.
Hmm.
And I know that sounds kind of, you know, unusual, but that's just what happened. And I started just hearing energy about Dr. King, uh, who became a household name while he lived in Montgomery, Alabama. He's not from Montgomery, Alabama. He's from Atlanta, Georgia, but he took a pastorship at a church in Montgomery, Alabama called the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church.
Hmm.
And it was from that place that he became the leader of the movement that started with the bus boycott. And that bus boycott was brewing for a very long time. We're all familiar. Rosa Parks
Hmm.
lived in Montgomery, Alabama. She was the person that actually was chosen to create the circumstances so that they could begin a legal, um, they could start to legally challenge the segregation of public buses. So Dr. King was in Montgomery, Rosa Parks was in Montgomery. That's when we all started to know who is Dr. Martin Luther King. And that is from the big rally that everybody remembers at the Lincoln Memorial, where Dr. King gave that famous speech,
I have a
I
dream.
have a dream.
Yeah.
So just spending that much time in Dr. King's energy field made me want to go to the place where he, took off his temporary identity, his transient identity as like this, the fourth generation minister,
Hmm.
and he revealed his true identity as a person, not as a person at all. He revealed his true identity as a peacemaker, a change maker, uh, the energy that could create something new. He revealed this identity there. I just wanted to go there.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I started hearing about Brian Stevenson's Equal Justice Initiative and these museums that he had created. And so I went, and I went just by myself, and I called it a pilgrimage. It was my pilgrimage. This particular body mind was born in Beaufort, South Carolina. Um, Both of my parents were from the South. when I was little and we'd go back to the South, to South Carolina,
Mhm.
I would see, I could see what had happened in the past, and it was very intense and tragic, and it made me very uncomfortable. And having lived in the North my whole life, essentially, there are so many people in the North who are afraid to go to the South because we have these ideas about what Southerners are like, and what happened there. We try to distance ourselves from what happened there.
Mhm.
Um, and we try to say that there's a difference between the people in the North and the people in the South. And, look at what they're still flying Confederate flags and et cetera, et cetera. And I definitely had I had a similar resistance. I had a fear, like once my people got out of the South, I'm like, let's never go back there again. That's a dumb idea.
Right.
Um, but again, there's no peace in running away from anything. And that's been my life lesson. If I start running from something, I'm never actually in a state of contentment. So it was necessary for me to go back to the South, back to these places where very upsetting things appear to have happened, so that I could be a witness. I could bear witness to these things and have as my purpose and my mission going there, to be a healing consciousness, not just go there to affirm how bad people have been and how badly African Americans were treated. And no, I went there as consciousness to really drop into just the level of consciousness itself and see what happens if I start to unplug some of this intense, conditioned thought pattern around us and them, victims and perpetrators, oppressors and oppressed. Now, it's also really important for me to say I'm not interested in bypassing, overlooking, or denying the horrors of what our history has contains. The things that we've done to each other are horrible. And if I'm not interested in having that continue, I have to elevate my consciousness above the level of thinking that created those ideas. Those ideas, for me to harm another human, I first have to make them separate from me.
Right.
The first thing I have to do is tell myself and believe it that I can harm them without harming myself. That's the premise of hurting someone else, is there some part of me that thinks we're not connected? Because if I knew I was connected to that person, I wouldn't want to harm them, because I'd understand I can't just harm them. I'm harming me. And nobody consciously harms themselves. We harm ourselves, but we don't do it in full consciousness.
Right.
So my wanting to bring full consciousness to these horrible experiences was because I had this fundamental understanding, which I learned by 30 years of practicing A Course in Miracles, that all suffering is some form of separation, or
So
all
is healing
separation is
racism
suffering.
healing the illusion of separation?
Sorry?
Is healing racism healing the illusion of separation?
Yes, because racism is just another form of separation.
Right.
That's what racism is. Racism is taking a physical attribute and deciding very, with no real basis,
Arbitrarily, right?
very arbitrarily, just deciding that that particular attribute makes you different. And we do the same thing on the other end of the spectrum. We say that certain attributes make you more valuable, certain attributes make you less valuable. So it's all arbitrary. It's all also temporary. There are times and places on the planet where having dark skin you were the elevated
Right.
You were the queen, the king, the royalty. That, I mean, it's still true in places on the planet.
Right.
It so my point simply is that any form of um, separation is arbitrary.
Right.
Anything that I decide makes you different, I just made that up. I made it up, and so that for that reason alone, it should be challenged. Like it needs to be looked at, and that's kind of what I wanted to do when I went to Montgomery, and I felt pretty radical. It's
Hmm.
a pretty radical thing to do. It's doesn't seem like it's a very popular idea that I will go to this place where so much suffering has unfolded because everyone is so entrenched in these old ideas. You know, based on these old ideas, people will not let go of um, the suffering. That I would go there and say, you know what, I'm not going to I'm not going to look at it as black, white. I'm not going to look at it this way. I'm just going to see what consciousness does when we forget who we really are. And what I said in the beginning about when I peel back the layers, every one of us is innocent.
Hmm.
That's what, that's the only real peace there is. That if I peel back the layers, everyone is innocent. Now, do I mean by that that nobody should be held accountable for their actions, or people shouldn't be put in jail or whatever? That's, I'm not saying that at all. Um, the way we learn on this plane of existence is by having consequences. Our actions have consequences.
Right.
My actions have consequences. My words have consequences. That's why I'm trying to be careful with my words right now so that I don't, um, uh, I'm not misunderstood, so that nobody feels like I'm not um, valuing and validating their actual experience, because
Right.
I'm not trying to invalidate anyone's experience. Um, but I am saying
How do we get past it? How do we get past?
that how, yes, in order to heal, I mean, really heal this, not just pass more legislation, because, you know, that's what Martin Luther King was doing. He was, his, one of the things he said was, you know, um, I don't want to get lynched. So that's why we're passing this legislation. It's like, I can love people and that's great. But in order for them not to actually string me up, I need some laws in place to keep that from happening. You know,
Pragmatic. Yes.
you need both.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that we don't need, you know, laws and rules and consequences. I'm also saying that there are a lot of people really working beautifully and doing that difficult work of creating protective legislation. The work I'm called to do is to see with fresh eyes
Right.
and see the innocence that's present, and begin to walk around without those conditioned ideas of black, white, right and wrong, you know, oppressor and oppressed, and just see what's available when those old ideas are starting to dissolve. And so the people I'm bringing to Montgomery, that's what we're working with. We're working with expanding our consciousness first by looking at where we've come from.
Hmm.
So with each person who goes, we do a 2-hour constellation. We look at their lineage, at how race and privilege was, you know, factored into their family lineage.
Hmm.
We look at what's going on in their family now, and we also really help. I help each person understand what is calling them to this experience, so
Hmm.
that you're not just going there like, you know, deer in the headlights, like whoa, but you're actually, you understand who in your lineage is saying, please be the point of consciousness that can get us off the hook.
Yeah.
because we're sitting in the, we're stuck. Basically, our lineages are stuck unless we expand. So we're just getting in touch with what is it that's calling you into this, and can we articulate it so that you are very clear. That way, when you are confronted with something that feels uncomfortable, you can handle it. You're
Hmm.
not going to feel like, your feet were taken out from under you because you're not really sure why you're there.
Right.
So in addition to doing work before we go, we work with a couple of books. One of them is this book called My Grandmother's Hands.
Oh, beautiful.
And this book is written by somebody who is a licensed therapist, but calls himself a somatic abolitionist. So somatic means in the body.
Right.
So we're going to do a lot of work with the body while we're there in group to continue to let the body process what we're taking in, and so that it doesn't get stuck and lodged in the body. We're trying to keep a flow going. We also continue to do work with ancestors while we're there. As a group, we're doing a ceremony at the Confederate White House. So Jefferson Davis had more than one White House. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy in the Civil War. One of the White Houses is in Montgomery, Alabama. And so we're going to do a Truth and Reconciliation ceremony, basically invoking all the ancestors of all of those who were involved in that incredibly difficult period of time, and just start to release the layers and forgiveness, invoking forgiveness for ourselves, for our ancestors, for the other side, whoever that is. So we're doing work like that. It's a full, it's an experience that is whole. We're not going, just to look at pictures and museums, and we're actually going as a transformative healing experience for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, for our planet.
Would you talk about what your vision is of the walk in Alabama, the walk in Montgomery? For some reason, that something about the motion of walking for me and walking that path that others have walked, and how that can be a very somatic healing experience. I know in the traditions I've studied, there's walking meditation, where you're moving in mindfulness with a focus, such as healing racism or finding peace. Could you talk about your vision of the walk that you guys are going to do?
Oh, you're referring
Or
to
that you do on
the
the tour?
the person that is taking us from on the Selma to Montgomery
Yes,
march.
right.
I don't actually know how much walking we're actually going to do in that. That's going to be, because that's a long way.
Yeah.
But what I can say, and I'm sure that he will share, his name is Jake Williams, and he walked with Dr. King in 1965 from Selma, the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, which is like a well-known bridge because that's where there was an incident called Bloody Sunday, where a bunch of marchers who were trying to march for voting rights were met by police and brutally beaten. And so they retreated, and then the President of the United States sent in National Guardsmen to protect the marchers. So eventually they did get to march. And the person who is our tour leader for that particular day, the day that we're going to be going from the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma to Montgomery by car, did do the march, and we are going to be getting in and out of the car at various points. But walking is such a big part of, as you said, it's such a big part of healing, or it's meditation, basically. And I remember reading from the people in Montgomery who were participating in the bus boycott, because once they couldn't ride the bus, they walked a lot. And that bus boycott lasted, I think, 370 days, or it's a long time to not have transportation. And a famous quote from one of the matriarchs, one of the old women of the community, is that my feet is tired, but my soul is rested. And she's shown walking with a box of fruit on her head, and her shoes are worn. But that is and I know that we all know this, that any kind of repetitive motion like that has a quality of expansion to it. You begin to relax the attention on the little body, and you begin to access something far greater. And the same is true for that walk from Selma to Montgomery. Those who were on that walk were feeling expansive, feeling inspired in spirit just by walking. Yeah, walking's a bit, we're going to do a bit of walking, but I don't want anyone to think that if they're not a walker or they can't walk, that they couldn't do this experience. It's not a mandatory part. We're not marching 50 miles.
Right.
We're not doing a 50-mile march.
So what is your advice for each of us to heal racism in our own lives, heal that illusion of separation? What do you suggest for, you have all these great experiences and tools that you're sharing with what you do, but what would you recommend for everyone, like the average person, when they become conscious that they're making those divisions and those judgments, whether it's whatever the discrimination is, whether it's political or race or something that takes you out of peace and harmony into a state of suffering? What's your advice? How to regain that peace?
So the first thing that I do is I notice that I'm not in peace.
Right.
And what gives me a clue that that I'm depriving myself of my own joy is that my breathing changes. So I don't breathe deeply if I'm in judgment or fear or any
stress
kind
response, right?
Right. We go into a form of fight or flight. The body chemistry changes. So the first thing that most of us can do, some people go so deeply into a feeling that they are no longer able to notice that they're deep in the feeling. They're completely taken over by the feeling.
Right.
But as soon as I can, I notice, I'm not breathing, or I'm really angry. And that is I think it's taken humanity all this time to be able to just get to that first intersection, the intersection of self-realization, like experience and realization, is the big evolutionary shift. And whether I decide to keep going on the road that I'm on and just, remain angry or resentful, that's That's an option.
Mhm.
Or I can decide that I want to investigate this feeling, because that's my only other option. If I try to, like, say I'll deal with it later, or I try to ignore it, it's just there, and it's
Mhm.
clouding, it's obscuring everything else. So the fact that we are having conversations like this, the fact that we live in a world where you can go onto YouTube and you can access interviews, you can go to the library, you can read books, um, and you can learn about ways of noticing your own feelings. Like, we have access to everything now. If we want to upgrade the level of enjoyment in our lives, we can do it. We all have the ability to go to a library and look on, look it up on a computer, or maybe we have a friend who has a book. Maybe we have a friend who knows how to do um, these techniques. Maybe there's a group in our neighborhood. And I actually, at one point in my life, got an enormous amount out of 12 step.
Mhm.
12 step was one of those huge aha experiences, because 12 step is a place where they actually, tell you first, you got to tell the freaking truth. You
Mhm.
can't be full of shit. You can't, like, pretend that that didn't happen or that you don't feel that way. You tell the truth. And from there, from the truth telling, then you have the ability to give that experience and the way you're looking at it to your higher power. So I'm bringing up 12 step because I don't want anyone to be left out. I don't want anyone to think, well, I can't get to a library. I don't have a computer or YouTube. I don't have any friends. There are many, many ways that we can access this new way of being around our feelings. We do not have to be victims to our feelings anymore. So basically, for me, the biggest thing is noticing the feeling and then saying, I have the capacity to choose what to do next. And
Right.
that, it's a practice, and it's like building a muscle.
Yeah.
um, it's not easy at all. There's so much momentum from our lineage. We've been trained and conditioned in thinking certain ways, certain thoughts for thousands of years. You don't turn a big ship around overnight. And the teachers that have turned things around overnight, those are few and far between. And that's wonderful, and I'm happy for them. For the majority of us, this shift in being able to see our thoughts, realize that they're making us unhappy, and making a new decision, it's like a step by step experience. Sometimes we get it right very quickly. Sometimes we hit on those areas of our lives where we're just very entrenched. It's stuck. It's what I call baked on. And in those areas, you got to let this stuff soak.
Right.
Put it in the sink and let it soak. So it just takes time. It just takes time. So, my suggestion also, and the other main thing is, just surround yourself with people whose minds are more open than yours. Do not think that you're going to overcome your own, negativity and stay with a group of people who are also negative. You
Right.
have to be around open, loving people who are willing to stumble through their own, darkness right along with you. So find people who feel the way you want to feel. That's, and you've heard, like I've told you, I do yoga with Adrian, I do the work with Byron Katie, all of that's free online. A Course in Miracles, free online.
Mhm.
Um, there's even YouTube videos about constellations, free online. So just don't even think you have to spend money. You don't have to spend any money to open your mind and to become free and to be happy and to be at peace. Most of it, you just ask and it will come to you. Just ask anybody, 12 steps, free. It's free.
Great.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add before I open it up to open the conversation up to some of the people listening?
I just want to say thank you to you, Rachel Elion. Thank you so much for asking me to, thank you. It's a
Thank you for
privilege.
agreeing.
I'm here to do what I'm here to do. And I so appreciate being able to talk about all of it.
Right.
So thank you very much. And thank you everybody who's listening presently and who will listen. Thank you for being here.
So this will be recorded. So if you want to listen to it again, I'll also release a transcript. I'll send it out and post it on the Think Peace Facebook page. So it's accessible whenever anybody wants to take another pass on it. And okay, so I'm going to open the conversation up. If anybody has any questions or comments or wants to join the conversation, please raise your hand. It's if you go under, I think, the participants pad, it'll allow you to chime in. Anybody have any questions? Or have anything to say? I can unmute you.
And Rachel Elion, also, if anyone wants to talk with me further, I do free 30-minute clarity sessions, both about the Freedom Rail tours and about family constellations. And on my website, which is freedomrailtours.com, there's a contact page, and you can just send me a note right there, and we can schedule a free 30-minute conversation.
Great. Okay, well, it doesn't look like anyone has any questions or comments. They're listening deeply, and thank you so much for joining us today and sharing who you are and what you do. Greatly appreciate it, and peace to all. Feel free to contact me over Think Peace if there's topics that you want the future conversations to be on. Our last one was how to find peace in your everyday life. Healing racism is a very powerful topic, and this powerful woman doing great work in that area, and bringing it to all of us so we can look at it in our everyday life. And thank you all again for coming. In peace.
Thank you, Rachel Elion. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I'm going to close this meeting. Thanks.